Welcome to the 6 Miles to Supper podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Cox, and I've lost over 80 pounds with intermittent fasting 6 days a week, eating whatever I wanted at my meals, taking a cheat day every Sunday, and walking 6 miles a day. And I'm here to help you on your weight loss journey. Let's talk about dirty fasting. Now, here's a caveat for anybody out there right now who is a clean faster. And if you know what clean fasting is, you probably know what I'm talking about already. But if you enjoy clean fasting, I just want you to know this episode isn't for you. This is only for people who maybe don't enjoy clean fasting and are looking for information about dirty fasting. Now, let's define clean versus dirty, because this is something that I didn't even know about. Like when I was practicing intermittent fasting, I started back in the late part of 2014, the very end, and then I was, implementing in 2015, and then 2016 is really when I made a lot of progress, and so I've been practicing it since then. So it's been several year now, and only, about a year or so ago did I hear about dirty fasting, but that was the way I had lost and have lost all the weight, and how I've maintained it is by dirty fasting. Basically, it means that you allow yourself some calories within the fasting window. So clean fasters will say absolutely no calories at all, or sometimes even going so far as to say no even flavored things, like say a LaCroix would be completely off limits during the fasting window. So maybe you could only have, say, water. Some people say no coffee even, but other people will say, well, you can have coffee as long as it's black. But see, clean fasting just doesn't work for my life. And I have found that dirty fasting made intermittent fasting really, really easy. In hindsight, I can tell you that if the clean fasting thing had been the rules that I had to set for myself, if I had thought in my head, I have to do clean fasting or nothing at all, I wouldn't have stuck with it, because it just would have made my life kind of miserable. And I'm all about making things enjoyable so that they're sustainable. And so practicing dirty fasting made intermittent fasting so much easier for me. It made it more sustainable, because I could see, like, I can do this for forever if I need to, because if I can have my coffee during the fasting window, like I can just drink coffee whenever I want, that I can do that. Like I can do this fasting thing as long as I have my coffee. And because I could have coffee, that allowed more fellowship to happen during my fasting window than would have happened otherwise. There's something about, if you can sit there with a cup of coffee while, say, your husband is having a sandwich or something, that feels a lot more comfortable than if you're just sitting there with a glass of water, and watching him eat. There's something psychologically that happens for the other person. It's not about me. It's about the other person's comfort level. And people just tend to not feel so bad if you're having a cup of coffee. It's just something, it seems like it's more substantial or something like that. And I would say that that's a very important thing too to really consider, because a lot of times we think about calories, and we're so focused on that. But the thing about eating, and then, when you're fasting, you're not eating, there's an element to eating that's about the fellowship. It's really not about the food. It's about sharing a meal with somebody and sharing this time with somebody. And I think it's important not to cut yourself off from that. And so I feel like, dirty fasting is a beneficial thing, because it can allow you to connect better with people. Also, it curbs hunger, especially in the early days, when I would feel hunger, especially because in the beginning, I really didn't realize how often stress was what was bringing the hunger on. To be able to sit down and have a cup of coffee, it would curb that hunger. And certainly when you are learning how to do intermittent fasting, there are going to be times where you just simply don't eat the right amount of food. You think that maybe you ate enough, but really you didn't, and hunger can creep in. So if you can have the coffee, it can curb that hunger until you get to your eating window. And lastly, it breaks up the day. So one thing, and this is especially true if you've ever tried any extended fasting, I think, because I've done a couple of 5-day fasts after I got to maintenance. I do not recommend them for when you're actually trying to lose weight, because you'll lose a bunch of weight because it's water weight, and then it comes right back. So it's really demoralizing if you're trying to do it for weight loss. But if you're just doing it for other reasons, I think you'll find the experience is okay. But when you're doing an all day long fast like that, you have nothing to break up the day, and the days can seem really long and kind of unbearable almost. But if you have coffee during the day, it breaks it up. And I mean, even with OMAD, I would say that is probably one of the more mentally challenging things, is that you don't have something to break up the day. If your one meal is at supper, then there's, you wake up and if you work from home or something, you can just, wake up and start working, and you work all day long, and the day can seem, like interminable. And it can help though to say, okay, I'm going to take a break and have some coffee, and you can just break up the day better. And I think, for me at least, I've been more productive because of that, not less. So let's talk about how I personally practice dirty fasting so that you can get a sense of exactly what I'm doing. So the first rule is I do not eat. Now, in the beginning of intermittent fasting, I was exceedingly strict with myself. When I said no eating, that meant absolutely never, ever, ever eat even a tiny bite of food, period. Like if I would accidentally, just without thinking of it because it's habit, pick up a slice of cucumber, right? And even if I had it like in my mouth, I would take it out of my mouth and put it in the trash can, because that was how strict I was being with myself about not even having a single bite of food. I would not taste food if I was cooking, like before dinner or something like that, and I was during my fasting window, or cooking breakfast for the kids, or anything, or maybe putting together something for the crock pot, things like that. I would just not have a single bite. And the reason I did that, the reason I put such a strict rule in place, was because I knew myself really well. And I knew that one little bite would lead to another little bite here and another little bite there. And eventually it would be like, well, yesterday I had a couple bites and that was okay. So this time I'll have like an apple. And then pretty soon, it would have been, say, an apple with peanut butter. And I knew myself in that kind of progression that would certainly happen. So I was very strict with myself in the beginning. I said, absolutely no bites of food, period. Now, over time, I want you to understand that became a little bit modified. I mean, barely though. I would say that because as you go on with intermittent fasting, as you get more practiced at it, you do develop more self-discipline and more control around food, I would say. And over time, and this was, I would say, over the course of a year or two, I would say probably a year, actually. I would say, and this was after I had also finished losing weight initially the first time. So I would occasionally have like a bite of food if I was cooking. So in other words, like just to taste the sauce so that it doesn't have too much salt or whatever. And I was very careful with myself, because I said this cannot become a thing that leads to basically eating throughout the fasting window. And it never did, because I had enough self-discipline at that point to just not eat, have that one bite of sauce, but that doesn't lead to 10 bites of sauce and then, a further snacking. So I was very strict with myself on the not eating thing. And I know that some people say, well, there's very few calories in certain kinds of food, so could you have that? From what I would call like a scientific standpoint, my understanding of the fasting window is that it's really, the fasted state, I should say. The fasted state is more of a spectrum, meaning that on one side you have fasted, and then on the other side you have fed. And so consuming just a few calories maybe pushes you further towards the fed state, but you're still mostly in the fasted state. And then you quickly get back into the fasted state, depending on how few calories there are. So like say 3 calories, or really the terms I've heard are probably about 60 to 100 or so calories will be enough to quote unquote break the fasted state. But then your body is constantly burning calories, so you get back into that fasted state relatively quickly. But see, that's why this also becomes kind of a complicated game if you let it, because then you're thinking, well, it's only 60 calories here and it's only 100 calories there, and pretty soon you're just eating the normal amount in your fasting window, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose of intermittent fasting. But I told myself that coffee was okay. And the evolution of my coffee started out because I really loved my coffee with cream and sugar. I would have probably several tablespoons of cream, half and half that is, and 1 tablespoon of sugar, which is a lot of sugar. I would say most people would say that, but that's how I started out. I was practicing intermittent fasting with that kind of coffee. Over time, I told myself, I probably shouldn't have sugar in my coffee, not because I was afraid of the calorie count of it, because a tablespoon of sugar has like 60 calories, but I thought, okay, I think that it would make fasting easier if I didn't have sugar. And that was just, a theory that I had with myself. I think fasting will be easier if I only have cream in my coffee. So if I can learn how to like just cream in my coffee, then it'll probably make fasting easier. And so it's like a win-win. There's, the getting rid of sugar, which probably isn't that great for my teeth, and it'll make fasting easier. So over time, I slowly weaned myself off of sugar. I mean, this was like tiny increments. I would cut, the sugar by say like a half a teaspoon at first. So it'd be like a tablespoon minus a half a teaspoon, and I just slowly weaned myself off of it. And each time I would decrease the amount of sugar, I would wait until I really enjoyed the coffee that way before I cut it even further. And what I found with that was by the time I got it down to no sugar and just cream, I really enjoyed the taste of that. And in fact, I highly preferred just the cream. Once I went down to cream, no sugar, if I ever accidentally, if I ordered, coffee with cream but no sugar, sometimes still the restaurant would send out a coffee with cream and sugar, and if you take a sip of that and you're not expecting it, it's a turnoff actually. So I was surprised at myself for being able to do that. But what I did find was that I really wanted the cream. I did not want to eliminate it and try to get it down to black. I tried black coffee. I've tried it many times, and I despise it. I really do not like black coffee. And so what I promised myself was I can have coffee with cream anytime I want it during the fasting window, anytime I want it. Now, what ended up happening was that I had it probably 3 times a day. Sometimes it was more than that. But what I noticed was if I get to 4 cups of coffee, I start to be more like anxious feeling, like just nervous all the time. So I limited myself because of that to 3, but not because of the amount of calories I was afraid I was consuming or anything. And I also told myself I'm not going to measure the cream because measuring drives me crazy. And so when you're thinking about your dirty fasting, if you're going to do this, I would say don't obsess about amounts of, what you're putting in your coffee, if that's what you're going to do. Instead, just make a rule and follow it. For me, that was I'm going to put as much cream in my coffee as I need to make it turn the color that I know that I like it. And if you're a coffee drinker, I think you understand what I mean. And so that's what I would do because, it depends on the coffee, first of all. Some brews are going to be a little bit darker, and so you're going to need more cream. And then other brews are a little bit lighter, and so you need less cream. So I just told myself that was my rule. I will just put as much cream as I like in it. And being able to have that during my fasting window, again, just made the fasting window seem really easy. And I'd like to encourage you right now, if right now the fasting window feels kind of like a punishment, make it so that it doesn't, because the whole point here is to try to create a life that you really enjoy, because you want to be able to stick with this for forever if you need to. And if you sit down right now and you try to visualize, what do you want your life to look like when you're down at your goal weight? What does that look like right now for you? Really think about that. And when I did that exercise, the thing that was certain for me was I want to be able to have my coffee with half and half whenever I want it during the day. And the idea that I would not have it, that like in the morning, like I wouldn't have my morning coffee, or I wouldn't have coffee with my husband in the afternoon. I knew myself well enough to know that's not going to work, because at my goal weight, I certainly want to be able to have, coffee in the morning and coffee with my husband in the afternoon. So I made it a practice that during the time I was losing weight, I did those things. And that was really helpful when I went into maintenance mode, because it wasn't so different from my normal life in weight loss, and it gave me a lot more confidence. I realized, like, I've been doing this the whole time, so my life isn't really that different. But what can happen is if you don't do that, sometimes you can be so hard on yourself during the weight loss time. You're like really strict with your rules, really restrictive with your rules, and then you get to the end and you're like, okay, now it's time to get rid of all those restrictions. And then what happens is you end up gaining the weight back because you're like, you have no rules at all. So it's important to think about keep the end in mind at all times. And then lastly, I always allowed myself things like LaCroix or chewing gum or mints, which, with strict clean fasters, they don't allow any of that. And I told myself, again, this was about making the fasting window as easy as possible. And to be able to, pop open a LaCroix that was, cold from the refrigerator, it was such a treat. And it can, again, break up the day, give you some variety in your fasting window. And I think, certainly fasting is more of a mental game than it is a physical one. Usually, it's more about how can you keep yourself disciplined in that window. And for me, that answer was, I can be really disciplined with not eating if I allow myself these certain things. Now, one thing that I didn't really experiment with, and I won't experiment with, is artificial sweeteners. And the reason for that is I just don't like how they taste. I tend to have like stomach ache and stuff after I've had artificial sweeteners. So I think they just don't really agree with me, and I don't particularly like how they taste. But I will let you know that I have talked with a lot of people who do use artificial sweeteners, even in the fasting window, like they'll have Diet Cokes or whatever. And they report that they still lose the weight and that it doesn't seem to hinder them. So, take that for what you will. But I would encourage you right now, if you're thinking, hey, I could really be more consistent with my fasting window if I had, something like Diet Coke or something to drink occasionally, then I would encourage you to experiment with that for yourself and see what your results are. So if you're going to implement dirty fasting into your, fasting window, here's what I would suggest. First of all, when you figure out your rules for the fasting window, be specific and always be able to say with certainty, when you look back on your fasting window, yes, I stuck with my rules, or no, I did not. Don't leave any room for vagueness, because that's where a lot of people get into trouble. It's kind of like, that whole thing of, well, that one bite led to that other bite. And so, but I allow myself bites occasionally. That kind of thing is like a recipe for disaster. So instead, let your rule be, I don't take bites of anything. Or, I only allow myself one taste of food, or, while I'm cooking, in order to adjust the seasonings, or whatever it is. You get to pick the rule, but make sure that you're holding yourself accountable to those rules. And if you find that you're not obeying your own rules that you've set up, it's a good opportunity to figure out why that is. Maybe it's that you really don't like that rule that you've set up for yourself and it's not going to work well in your life. And if you find that, then make the needed changes so that you can find rules that you can stick with and that you don't resent. Because, if you find yourself resenting the fasting window, I think that's a big red flag that says, wait, something needs to change here. And, you get to figure out for yourself what that might be. And the sooner you can do that, the better, because if you let resentment grow, it's going to derail your progress, maybe in huge ways later on. And one final caveat, there's a temptation there to try to blame the few calories that you might be consuming because of, half and half. If you decide to have half and half in your coffee, the temptation will be that if you are gaining weight, you're going to say, oh, well, it's that half and half in my coffee. But I would say the more likely thing is that during the eating window, you're overeating. And, I can only say that from my experience, because my experience has been you can certainly have half and half in your coffee and still lose down to a normal weight. But, again, really being honest with yourself and ask yourself, is it that it's this tiny amount of half and half in my fasting window? Or is it perhaps that during my eating window, I'm stress eating or I'm just eating to past the point of comfort? So practicing dirty fasting has been, I would say, crucially important for me when it comes to weight loss, especially sticking with intermittent fasting for years now. If I had tried to do really strict clean fasting, I know myself well enough to know I would have rebelled against those restrictions pretty early on. But, practicing it in this way has made it feel really easy and really enjoyable. So if you are currently, thinking, hey, I'd really like to try that, I would encourage you to try it, to still have clear guidelines for yourself and to track your progress and see what is it like. Are you making progress towards your goals or are you not? And then make changes if needed. So thank you for joining me in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. I want to take a moment to let you know about my second book, Overcoming Weight Loss Obstacles, How to Keep Going When Things Get Difficult. There are frustrating obstacles that appear on every weight loss journey. Things like plateaus, slow weight loss, and dealing with emotional eating are all things that I have had to overcome. And in this book, I take you through each obstacle and I give you tips on how to overcome them. It goes all the way from getting started with weight loss through the weight loss phase and on into maintenance. I give a case study at the end of each chapter that talks about my experience with that obstacle, and it even talks some about the things I still struggle with. I've found that the obstacles are actually the things that will make you stronger and that will teach you the most about yourself. To buy the book, follow the link in the description.